Hello and welcome to Tales After Midnight. Tonight's story takes us back to one of the darkest and most brutal chapters of the Pacific War. February 20th, 1945. Northern sector of Iwo Jima. Japanese defensive positions stared out across the black volcanic ash as unfamiliar American tanks slowly advanced toward them. Thick black smoke trailed behind the vehicles, but it wasn't the smoke of battle damage. It was something else entirely. One tank halted, its turret slowly rotating toward a reinforced concrete bunker. Where the main cannon should have been, there was a different shape altogether. A shortened, modified barrel ending in a wide metal nozzle. Then came the sound, a sharp, mechanical hiss, like compressed air violently escaping its container. A split second later, a roaring stream of burning fuel burst outward, arcing across nearly 150 yards of ash-covered ground. The fire engulfed a neighboring pillbox in a wave of napalm-thickened death. Flames poured into firing slits, wrapped around concrete walls, and flooded every opening. The screams from inside lasted only seconds before being swallowed by the crackle of fire. Stunned Japanese defenders scrambled for field telephones, desperately trying to report what they had just witnessed. 8 modified Sherman tanks, each equipped with flamethrowers, weapons the defenders had never encountered before. Weapons that would fundamentally alter the nature of combat in what was already shaping up to be the most savage battle of the Pacific War. What Lieutenant Yamada and his men did not know was that these machines represented months of secret development at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. They were the result of top-secret modifications carried out by Navy Seabees working around the clock. It was the fusion of American industrial power with battlefield necessity, a combination that would later prompt one Marine battalion commander to call it the single most effective weapon of the entire operation. The Battle of Iwo Jima had entered its second day, and the mathematics of death were about to shift dramatically. These 8 flamethrower tanks alone would account for more than 30% of Japanese casualties through incineration, a statistic that would haunt survivors on both sides for decades. The Imperial Japanese Army had spent an entire year transforming Iwo Jima into the most formidable defensive position in the Pacific. 8 square miles of jagged volcanic rock had been reshaped into a fortress that defied every principle of conventional military doctrine. General Tadashi Kurabayashi, appointed to command the island's defense in June 1944, understood with absolute clarity that defeating the Americans outright was impossible. His mission was different. He intended to make the capture of Iwo Jima so costly that the United States would think twice before invading the Japanese mainland. Kurabayashi had carefully studied the disasters at Saipan, Peleliu, and throughout the Philippines. Traditional Japanese defensive tactics, meeting the enemy at the water's edge and launching massive banzai charges, had proven catastrophically ineffective against overwhelming American firepower. Breaking with centuries of samurai tradition, the general made a revolutionary decision. There would be no glorious frontal assaults. No warriors seeking honorable death in open combat. Instead, his 21,000 men would fight from beneath the ground, turning Iwo Jima into a subterranean killing field. By February 1945, Japanese engineers had completed more than 11 miles of interconnected tunnels, with plans to extend the network to 17 miles in total. Some sections reached the equivalent of 7 stories deep into the volcanic rock. Over 5,000 caves and underground chambers had been carved out, many large enough to hold 300 to 400 men at a time. Across the surface, 1,500 fortified positions dotted the landscape. Concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick, reinforced with steel rods salvaged from abandoned construction projects, crowned every strategic rise and ridgeline. Each position was meticulously placed to provide overlapping fields of fire. Every inch of the island surface could be swept by Japanese guns hidden behind steel blast doors that opened only long enough to fire, then slammed shut before American forces could retaliate. The tunnel system itself was a marvel of engineering. Ventilation shafts disguised as natural rock formations supplied fresh air deep underground. Fully equipped underground hospitals, complete with operating theaters, were capable of treating 400 wounded soldiers. Communication centers buried 75 feet below the surface coordinated defensive operations through miles of telephone wire. Storage chambers held enough rice, water, and ammunition to sustain a 2-month siege. The largest underground complex, beneath Hill 382, contained a cavern 50 meters long and 20 meters wide, large enough to shelter an entire battalion. Kurabayashi deployed his forces with mathematical precision. The southern sector around Mount Suribachi was designated a semi-independent command under Colonel Kanehiko Otochi, with 2,000 men operating artillery positions capable of firing directly onto the landing beaches. The northern plateau, where the terrain offered the strongest defensive advantages, held the bulk of Japanese forces, 15,000 men under Kurabayashi's direct control. Between these two strongholds, a central reserve of 4,000 troops could reinforce any threatened sector through the tunnel network. The Americans knew Iwo Jima would be difficult. Intelligence reports warned of heavy fortifications, but the true scale of Kurabayashi's underground fortress remained hidden from aerial reconnaissance. 74 consecutive days of bombing had dropped nearly 6,800 tons of explosives on the island. Naval bombardment added another 22,000 shells. American planners believed this relentless assault had shattered most Japanese resistance. They confidently predicted the island would fall within 5 days. They were catastrophically wrong. The preliminary bombardment had destroyed fewer than 200 of the island's 1,500 fortified positions. The tunnel system remained almost entirely intact. Most Japanese soldiers had not even been wounded by the overwhelming display of American firepower. 5 months before the invasion, back at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, Colonel George F. Unmark assembled a small team that would quietly revolutionize armored warfare in the Pacific. Unmark, a career Army officer with 44 years of military service, commanded the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service's most secret project in the Central Pacific, known simply as CNPAC. His mission was clear: develop a weapon system capable of neutralizing Japanese cave and bunker complexes that had proven nearly immune to conventional arms. The colonel's initial team was modest in size, drawn primarily from the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company. But Unmark understood the scale of the challenge demanded exceptional talent. He requisitioned 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabees, whose mechanical ingenuity and practical engineering skills were already legendary. From across the Pacific Theater, additional specialists were pulled into the project. Personnel from the 5th Marine Tank Battalion and the 81st Ordnance Company were added, forming a rare joint service team unified by a single, ruthless objective: create a weapon that could burn Japanese defenders out of their caves. Leading the technical development were machinists Mate First Class Alton Riker and electricians Mate Second Class Joseph Kell, two Seabees whose names would never appear in newspaper headlines, yet whose work would ultimately save thousands of American lives. These men brought hard-earned battlefield experience from earlier island campaigns. They had watched Marines die again and again while trying to assault fortified positions that artillery simply could not destroy. They understood that the problem was not a lack of firepower. The problem was how to apply that firepower effectively against an enemy fighting almost entirely underground. The challenge was enormous. Earlier attempts to mount flamethrowers on tanks had produced inconsistent and often disappointing results. The Army's first designs were crude field modifications, essentially portable infantry flamethrowers bolted onto tank hulls. The Canadian Ronson system, of which the Marines had acquired 30 units, had a practical range of only 60 to 80 yards when firing thickened fuel. Its fuel capacity allowed for just 30 to 40 seconds of total firing time. Worse still, these systems were maintenance nightmares, frequently malfunctioning in combat, with failure rates exceeding 40% under field conditions. The first real breakthrough came with conversions of the M3 light tank, nicknamed the Satan tanks. The 43rd Chemical Company's initial creation, known as Hell's Fire, demonstrated that the concept had promise, but it also exposed critical limitations. Turret traverse was restricted to only 180 degrees. Elevation of the flame projector was severely limited. Most importantly, the light tank's thin armor left it dangerously vulnerable to the Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns that were standard equipment in many defensive positions. Colonel Unmark's team needed something far more capable. Using military channels that reached all the way to the highest levels of command, Unmark reported directly to the staff of Admiral Chester Nimitz. Through this process, they located 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks available for conversion. Each Sherman weighed approximately 35 tons and was powered by a 500 horsepower Ford JAV-8 engine. Armor thickness ranged from 25 mm to as much as 76 mm. Standard armament included a 75 mm main gun along with multiple .30 caliber machine guns. These tanks had already proven their durability in European combat and, crucially, possessed the armor protection necessary to survive Japanese anti-tank fire. But acquiring the tanks was only the beginning. The real innovation came when Riker and Kell decided to merge the best features of 3 different flamethrower systems: the British Ronson, the Navy's Mark I, and captured German designs recovered in North Africa. Working 20-hour days in the suffocating Hawaiian heat, sleeping in shifts beside their welding equipment, the Seabees began constructing something entirely unprecedented. The resulting weapon, officially designated the CBH-1, Construction Battalion, Hawaii, Model 1, represented a quantum leap in flamethrower technology. Installation was extraordinarily complex. Each tank required more than 150 pounds of welding rod and over 1,100 electrical connections, every single one critical to proper operation. Converting a single Sherman took approximately 1,200 man-hours and involved 150 custom-machined parts fabricated by Seabees metalworkers. Each conversion cost between $20,000 and $25,000 at the time, equivalent to roughly $360,000 in modern currency. The technical specifications were revolutionary. The CBH-1 system operated at 300 pounds per square inch of pressure, nearly 3 times that of earlier flamethrower designs. Its maximum effective range reached 150 yards when firing thickened fuel, almost triple the distance of standard portable flamethrowers. The fuel mixture itself was a carefully calibrated blend of diesel fuel, gasoline, and a napalm thickener developed by the 43rd Chemical Laboratory. Once ignited, it burned at approximately 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The system could sustain continuous fire for up to 80 seconds, though doctrine recommended short bursts of 2 to 3 seconds to conserve fuel and maintain accuracy. Most critically, the flamethrower replaced the tank's main gun entirely, allowing a full turret traverse of 270 degrees and elevation ranging from -10 to +35 degrees using the tank's existing fire control systems. The gunner aimed the flame projector with the same periscope and controls used for a conventional cannon, making it just as precise. Because of this integration, tank crews required minimal additional training to operate the new weapon effectively. Perhaps the most devastating innovation, however, was psychological. The Seabees painted the modified tanks in standard Marine Corps olive drab. There were no special markings, no visible indication of their true purpose. To Japanese observers, they appeared to be ordinary Sherman tanks, until the instant they opened fire. By then, escape was impossible. The fuel system itself was another engineering triumph. The primary fuel tanks held 290 gallons of thickened fuel, supplemented by an additional 10 gallons of unthickened fuel used for ignition. A separate pressure tank stored compressed nitrogen, deliberately chosen over compressed air because nitrogen would not support combustion if the tank was penetrated by enemy fire. Multiple redundant safety features were built into the system to prevent the catastrophic explosions that had plagued earlier flamethrower vehicles. Deep inside the command bunker beneath Hill 382, General Kurabayashi had arranged his defenses according to precise mathematical calculations. Kill zones overlapped at carefully measured angles. Artillery spotters concealed in spider holes could direct fire onto any grid coordinate within seconds. Machine gun nests were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire, funneling American units into pre-registered artillery targets. The general's defensive philosophy was brutally simple: conserve ammunition, remain underground, and force the Americans to come to you. His standing orders, issued to every subordinate commander, were explicit. Do not die until you have killed 10 Americans. Large-scale counterattacks were strictly forbidden. Every soldier was instructed to hold his position until overrun, then continue fighting with grenades, bayonets, and finally bare hands. By Kurabayashi's cold calculations, 21,000 defenders could theoretically inflict 210,000 casualties, far more than the total strength of the American invasion force. Japanese defensive doctrine had evolved dramatically since the early battles of the Pacific. Intelligence reports from Saipan and Peleliu had been studied in detail, and the lessons learned there would now be tested to their absolute limits. Highlighted just how vulnerable flamethrower operators were. The weapon's unmistakable signature, thick black smoke produced by burning diesel fuel, made flame troops easy targets. Limited range forced operators to move dangerously close to enemy positions, exposing them to concentrated fire. In earlier Pacific battles, casualty rates among portable flamethrower teams had exceeded 70%, with some units suffering losses as high as 92% among flame operators alone. As a result, Japanese forces developed specialized anti-flamethrower training. Machine gun crews were instructed to immediately concentrate fire on any soldier carrying the distinctive twin tanks of an infantry flamethrower. Snipers were issued extra ammunition specifically for targeting flame operators. Infantry units practiced rushing flamethrower positions with bayonets, exploiting the weapon's minimum firing angle, a zone where the operator could not depress the nozzle low enough to defend himself. But all of this planning rested on a single assumption: flamethrowers would be carried by infantry. The concept of armored flamethrowers, tanks capable of approaching fortified positions under the protection of their own armor while delivering precise incendiary attacks from unprecedented range, had never been considered. Japanese defenses, meticulously engineered to survive artillery barrages and aerial bombardment, contained no special countermeasures against burning petroleum that could seep through firing slits, ventilation shafts, and access tunnels. That oversight would prove fatal. The fortifications that represented Japan's greatest defensive strength would become death traps when confronted by weapons that transformed solid bunkers into crematoriums. The 8 M4A3 flamethrower tanks landed on Iwo beaches on February 19, D-Day, mixed among standard Sherman tanks from the 4th and 5th Marine Tank Battalions. The official Marine Corps designation was M4A3R5, though various documents listed alternate names, including POA, CWS, H1 and CBMK1. They came ashore in the 5th Assault Wave at approximately 1,000 hours, after the beaches had been only marginally secured. Navy orders directed that they be held in reserve during the initial landings. Marine commanders wanted to evaluate the tactical situation before committing these rare and irreplaceable weapons. The tanks were distributed carefully, 4 assigned to the 4th Marine Division and 4 to the 5th Marine Division. Each vehicle received an identification number, ranging from 431 through 438. Some crews had painted nicknames on their tanks: Hellfire, Corkscrew, Blaze of Glory. Most, however, remained unmarked, their true purpose concealed until the moment of engagement. For the first 24 hours, the flamethrower tanks sat idle near the beachhead while Marines died by the hundreds attempting to advance against invisible Japanese positions. The volcanic ash, which swallowed a man's boots up to the calf with every step, made infantry movement agonizingly slow and exhausting. Conventional tactics were failing catastrophically. Naval gunfire could not penetrate bunkers buried beneath 10 feet of volcanic rock and reinforced concrete. Artillery shells detonated harmlessly against defenses designed to withstand direct hits from 16-inch naval guns. Marine riflemen found themselves assaulting fortifications that might as well have been solid mountains. The casualties from the first day were staggering. 2,420 Marines killed or wounded. The beach itself became a killing ground as previously hidden Japanese artillery opened fire on the tightly packed landing forces. Sherman tanks attempting to push inland bogged down in the ash or were destroyed by concealed anti-tank guns. By nightfall, the invasion force had advanced less than 700 yards from the shoreline, far short of D-Day objectives that called for capturing the first airfield. By the morning of February 20th, D+1, the situation had become desperate. The 21st Marine Regiment was pinned down while attempting to cross Motoyama Airfield No. 1. 3 reinforced concrete pillboxes dominated the approach, their overlapping machine gun fire creating a kill zone more than 200 yards wide. 2 rifle companies had already been shredded in frontal assaults. In less than 48 hours, the regiment had suffered casualty rates approaching 35%. Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis, commanding 3rd Battalion, 21st Marines, made the decision that would alter the course of the battle. He requested the Flamethrower tanks. At 1,420 hours, the first M4A3 R5 Flamethrower tank entered combat. Tank number 431, commanded by Staff Sergeant Robert Meza, a combat veteran of Saipan and Tinian, approached the Japanese positions at an oblique angle using the twisted wreckage of destroyed Japanese aircraft as cover. To enemy observers, it appeared to be just another standard Sherman attempting the same doomed advance. Meza ordered a slow, deliberate approach. He knew surprise was their only advantage. Inside the tank, the 5-man crew prepared for action. Driver Private First Class James Morrison carefully guided the 35-ton vehicle through volcanic ash that threatened to swallow its tracks. Assistant Driver Private Robert Chin manned the bow machine gun, scanning for Japanese infantry emerging from hidden positions. Loader Corporal Anthony Vitelli monitored the pressure gauges. 300 psi, optimal for maximum range. Gunner Corporal Thomas Carlson stared through his periscope, locking onto the nearest pillbox. At 125 yards, Meza gave the order. Gunner, Flamethrower, pillbox, fire. The Seabees 1 erupted with a roar witnesses later described as the sound of the devil's own blowtorch. A stream of napalm-thickened fuel arced through the air, driven by compressed nitrogen. The burning liquid struck the pillbox aperture with terrifying precision, splashing through the machine gun port and flowing inside like molten lava. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Temperatures inside the concrete bunker surged past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. Oxygen was consumed so rapidly that some Japanese soldiers suffocated before the flames even reached them. Those who survived the initial blast tried to escape through rear exits, only to be cut down by Marine riflemen who had learned to position themselves for exactly that moment. Sergeant Meza rotated the turret 30 degrees and brought the flamethrower onto the second pillbox. This time, the defenders were ready. A Japanese 47mm anti-tank gun fired at point-blank range, the shell slamming into the Sherman's frontal armor and ricocheting harmlessly skyward. The tank rocked violently from the impact but kept moving forward. Carlson responded instantly, triggering another burst of flame and holding it for nearly 15 seconds until thick black smoke poured from every opening in the fortification. The third pillbox required a different approach. Its position behind a jagged rocky outcropping prevented a direct line of fire. Meza ordered Morrison to advance to within 80 yards, dangerously close to concealed Japanese infantry positions. As the tank crested a low rise, Japanese soldiers burst from spider holes, charging forward with satchel charges and magnetic mines clutched to their chests. The bow gunner opened up with the .30 caliber machine gun, cutting several attackers down, but others reached the tank's blind spots along the rear. This was the moment the Seabees modifications proved their true value. Unlike earlier flamethrower tanks that could fire only forward, the CBH-1's full traverse capability allowed Carlson to swing the turret a full 180 degrees and fire directly behind the vehicle. The attacking infantry vanished in a wall of fire that witnesses later said looked like the gates of hell opening on the battlefield. With the third pillbox destroyed, Marines of the 21st Regiment surged forward, advancing more than 400 yards in just 2 hours, more ground than they had gained in the previous 2 days combined. Word raced through Marine communication lines. The flamethrower tanks worked. Even more importantly, they survived where conventional armor had failed. Within 6 hours, all 8 flamethrower tanks were engaged across the front. The tactical transformation was immediate and unmistakable. Tank number 434, supporting the 23rd Marines near the East Boat Basin, destroyed 4 fortified positions in a single afternoon. Its crew refined a maneuver they called corkscrew and burn, approaching targets in a spiraling pattern to evade anti-tank fire while maintaining constant flame suppression. The psychological impact matched the physical devastation. Japanese soldiers, trained to fight to the death, began abandoning positions when they saw the flame tanks advancing. Fortifications were left unmanned rather than defended against incineration. Tank number 437 introduced breach and clear tactics alongside the 24th Marines. First, the flamethrower would neutralize the defenders. Then Marine engineers rushed in with demolition charges to permanently collapse the bunker. This combination proved brutally effective against positions that had resisted days of conventional assault. In a single afternoon, one flamethrower engineer team destroyed 7 bunkers that had halted an entire battalion's advance. But it was tank number 432 that revealed the weapon's true psychological power. Supporting the 26th Marines near the base of Mount Suribachi, the tank approached a complex of interconnected caves. Commander Sergeant William Patterson ordered his driver to halt 100 yards from the cave entrances. Through his periscope, Patterson could see Japanese soldiers watching from the shadows. He fired a brief burst of flame into the air, not at the caves, but as a demonstration. The effect was immediate and unprecedented. Japanese soldiers began fleeing through rear exits, abandoning positions they had been ordered to defend to the death. Marine riflemen were so stunned by the sight that they hesitated, momentarily forgetting to fire on the retreating enemy. Within 30 minutes, an entire defensive sector collapsed without the tank firing directly into a single position. It marked the first mass abandonment of defensive positions in Japanese military history. By nightfall on February 20th, Marine units were already reshaping their tactics around the availability of flamethrower tanks. Attacks were delayed until flame tanks could be brought forward. Infantry learned to advance roughly 50 yards behind the tanks, close enough to exploit the shock effect, but far enough to avoid the intense heat blast that could scorch skin and singe eyebrows at 30 yards. Artillery observers began marking targets specifically for flamethrower engagement rather than conventional bombardment. The statistics from the first day of flamethrower tank combat were astonishing. 47 fortified positions destroyed. Marine casualties in supported sectors reduced by 40% compared to the previous day. More than 600 yards of ground gained in areas that had been completely static for 48 hours. But the most significant number was psychological. For the first time, substantial numbers of Japanese soldiers were abandoning their positions instead of dying where they stood. The Japanese response was swift and largely ineffective. That night, General Kurabayashi issued emergency orders designating the flame tanks as priority targets. All available 47mm anti-tank guns were ordered to concentrate fire on these vehicles. Special assault teams were formed, volunteers tasked with attacking the tanks using explosive charges strapped to their bodies. Infantry units were instructed to aim concentrated rifle fire at the flame tanks' vision blocks, hoping to blind the crews. Yet the fundamental problem remained unsolved. Flamethrower tanks were visually indistinguishable from standard Shermans until the moment they fired. Japanese gunners could not identify priority targets until it was already too late. Worse still, Focusing on flame tanks meant ignoring conventional Shermans providing covering fire. Through mechanical innovation, the Americans had achieved complete tactical surprise. On February 23, D+4, the same day Marines raised the flag atop Mount Suribachi, the flamethrower tanks faced their greatest test. The 3rd Marine Division was attempting to seize Hill 382, the second highest point on Iwo Jima and the keystone of Kuribayashi's northern defenses. The hill was riddled with bunkers and tunnels descending 7 stories underground. Every approach had been pre-registered for artillery and mortar fire. Japanese engineers had designed the position to be impregnable, multiple defensive lines, overlapping fields of fire, and underground galleries that allowed defenders to reappear behind attacking forces. Earlier assaults had ended in disaster, with casualty rates exceeding 50%. 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, had already lost 70% of its strength just attempting to reach the hill's approaches. At 0800 hours, 4 flamethrower tanks advanced in echelon formation, supported by 6 conventional Shermans and a full battalion of Marine infantry. This time, the Japanese were ready. Hidden 75mm mountain guns, far more powerful than the standard 47mm anti-tank weapons, waited in silence. Weapons had been emplaced specifically to counter the flame tanks. As the lead flamethrower tank crested the first rise, concentrated fire erupted from 3 concealed positions almost simultaneously. The first shell slammed into tank number 433's track, tearing it apart and immobilizing the vehicle. Despite being crippled, the crew continued operating the flamethrower from a stationary position, projecting a continuous wall of fire that obscured the advance of the tanks behind it and suppressed multiple Japanese firing points. This deliberate act of self-sacrifice allowed the remaining vehicles to maneuver under cover. Tank number 431 pushed forward through the smoke, advancing under artillery fire that would have annihilated any infantry assault. Shrapnel hammered against the armor like hailstones. Driver Private First Class Morrison later recalled navigating solely by periscope through smoke so dense he could barely see 10 feet ahead. At a distance of 60 yards from the primary Japanese bunker complex, tank number 434 unleashed its flamethrower. This time, however, the Japanese defenses responded differently. Engineers had fitted steel plates over bunker apertures, heavy shutters that could be slammed shut between machine gun bursts. The burning fuel splashed against the sealed metal and ran off harmlessly. For a moment, it appeared the Japanese had finally found a countermeasure to the flame tanks. Then Gunner Corporal Michael Rodriguez noticed something critical. Under sustained flame contact, the steel plates began to glow cherry red. Metal heated to that degree would inevitably warp, creating gaps. Ignoring doctrine and the danger to fuel reserves, Rodriguez maintained continuous fire for 45 seconds. The steel plate buckled inward. Burning fuel forced its way through the warped seams. Inside the bunker, the results were catastrophic. Ammunition detonated in violent chain reactions. Concrete fractured under thermal shock. Secondary explosions exposed tunnel entrances Japanese engineers had painstakingly concealed. Marine infantry surged forward, hurling satchel charges into every opening before defenders could regroup. Within 3 hours, the outer defenses of Hill 382 had been breached. The supposedly impregnable position was collapsing. But the battle also revealed the flamethrower tank's limitations. Tank number 431 exhausted its entire fuel supply after 80 seconds of sustained firing. Refueling required withdrawing to designated rear areas where specialized fuel trucks waited, a process that took no less than 2 hours. During that window, Japanese defenders had time to reinforce and reorganize. The flame tanks were devastating, but not inexhaustible. On that same day, another truth became clear. Man-portable flamethrowers still had a vital role to play. When flamethrower tanks were unable to maneuver through a narrow ravine known as the amphitheater, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams advanced on foot carrying a 70-pound M2-2 flamethrower. For 4 hours of brutal combat, protected by only 4 riflemen, 2 of whom would be killed defending him, Williams destroyed 7 pillboxes inaccessible to tanks. His method perfectly complemented the flame tanks. Where armor could not reach, determined men with portable flamethrowers still pressed forward. Williams' actions that day would earn him the Medal of Honor. He would later become the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipient, passing away in June 2022 at the age of 98. His citation noted in part that he was quick to volunteer his services when our tanks were maneuvering vainly to open a lane for the infantry through the network of reinforced concrete pillboxes, buried mines, and black volcanic sands. Acting alone, Williams moved forward again and again to silence devastating machine gun fire from seemingly unassailable positions. The statistics from the first week of combat told a remarkable story. In sectors supported by flamethrower tanks, Marine casualties dropped by 40% compared to unsupported assaults. Japanese positions that had resisted days of conventional attack collapsed within hours. Over 7 days, the 8 flame tanks consumed nearly 70,000 gallons of fuel mixture while destroying an estimated 300 fortified positions. Daily consumption averaged 10,000 gallons, creating a logistical challenge that required the establishment of specialized fuel depots dangerously close to the front lines. By early March, the battle shifted to Iwo Jima's northern plateau, a nightmare landscape of sulfur pits, shattered ravines, and jagged volcanic rock that made tank operations nearly impossible. General Kurabayashi had deliberately positioned his final defensive line there, knowing the terrain heavily favored the defenders. Marines grimly referred to the area as the meat grinder, after suffering 850 casualties capturing a single hill. Tanks attempting to cross the broken ground through tracks on razor-sharp volcanic rock or became hopelessly bogged down on obstacles hidden beneath layers of ash. Once again, the flamethrower tanks adapted. Unable to maneuver freely, they were repositioned as mobile pillboxes at key points to support infantry advances. Marine engineers from the 5th Engineer Battalion worked through the night under sniper fire, building ramps and clearing narrow paths that allowed flame tanks to reach positions previously considered unreachable. When direct assault proved impossible, the tanks employed indirect fire techniques, bouncing streams of burning fuel off rock faces to reach around corners and into defilated positions. On March 8, D+17, tank number 436 accomplished what its crew later called the impossible shot. Supporting the 9th Marines' assault on Cushman's Pocket, a cluster of caves and bunkers carved into a nearly vertical cliff face, Tank Commander Sergeant Daniel Foster calculated that flame fired at maximum elevation might arc over the cliff edge and fall directly into Japanese positions from above. The physics were marginal. The CBH-1 flamethrower could elevate to 35 degrees, but the shot required nearly 40. Foster ordered the tank positioned atop a mound of rubble created by naval bombardment, tilting the entire vehicle backward. With the tank precariously balanced and enemy mortar rounds exploding nearby, Gunner Corporal Anthony Vitelli fired. The napalm-thickened fuel arced high into the air, seemed to hang for an instant at its apex, then cascaded downward into the Japanese positions below. The effect was devastating, not only physically, but psychologically. Japanese soldiers had believed their elevated defenses were immune to flamethrower attack. That belief died in the flames. Witnesses reported soldiers leaping from cliffs rather than burn alive, choosing death by falling over death by fire. By mid-March, the flamethrower tanks had become the centerpiece of a fully integrated combined arms system. Each flame tank now operated with a dedicated support team, conventional tanks to suppress enemy anti-tank guns, infantry for close protection and exploitation, protection against suicide attackers, engineers tasked with clearing obstacles, and ammunition crews hauling forward the massive 300-gallon fuel trailers that extended the tank's operational endurance. This tightly coordinated integration marked a revolution in assault tactics, one that would shape Marine Corps doctrine for decades to come. Fuel logistics alone demanded extraordinary effort. Electricians mate second-class Harold Kissel, one of the original designers, accompanied the flamethrower tanks to Iwo Jima to oversee maintenance in combat conditions. He later reported that keeping just 8 tanks operational required a supply chain stretching all the way back to Pearl Harbor. Fuel mixing stations ran around the clock, carefully blending diesel fuel, gasoline, and napalm powder in exact proportions. The mixture had to be used within 72 hours. Otherwise, it would separate and clog the flame guns, rendering them useless. The Japanese response continued to evolve as well. Specialized tank killer teams were formed, volunteers who attacked with explosive charges strapped to their bodies. These human bombs achieved limited success. On March 11th, tank number 438 was destroyed when a Japanese soldier detonated himself against the engine compartment, killing 3 of the 5 crew members. But such tactics ultimately proved futile. For every flamethrower tank damaged or disabled, replacements rolled up from the beach, and many damaged tanks were repaired and returned to action within days. General Kurabayashi, observing the battle from his command bunker deep beneath the northern plateau, grasped the strategic implications. In his final report to Imperial headquarters, transmitted on March 17, he wrote, "The enemy's special flame tanks have proven more effective than all artillery and aerial bombardment combined. They accomplish in minutes what conventional weapons cannot achieve in days. We possess no effective counter. The Americans possess not only superior numbers, but superior imagination." The crescendo came during the final week of March, as Marine forces pushed into the gorge, Kurabayashi's last major stronghold. This tangled labyrinth of ravines and caves, known to the Marines as the Bloody Gorge, became the ultimate test of American tactical innovation against Japanese defensive resolve. Within an area less than 700 yards square, the remaining 3,000 Japanese defenders prepared for a final stand. On March 21, D+30, all operational flamethrower tanks were concentrated for a coordinated assault. 6 of the original 8 were combat-ready, with 2 undergoing repairs, and they were reinforced by 4 additional flame tanks rushed in from Hawaii. These newer vehicles used the less effective Ronson system, with a range of only 60 to 80 yards, but together they formed the largest concentration of flamethrower weapons deployed in the entire Pacific War. Tank number 431, repaired after being disabled on Hill 382, led the advance. Its armor was scarred and patched, bearing welded repairs where shell fragments had punched through, deep dents from dozens of direct hits that failed to penetrate, and scorch marks from near misses. Tank number 433, fitted with a makeshift track repair that produced a distinctive clanking sound, took the left flank. Numbers 434, 436, and 437 advanced through the center, while number 432 anchored the right. The assault began at 1,000 hours. The tanks advanced in a crescent formation, creating overlapping fields of flame that left no dead ground for defenders to exploit. Marine infantry followed closely behind, tossing white phosphorus grenades into cave entrances to mark targets for the flame tanks. Engineers moved in immediately afterward, sealing cleared positions with demolition charges. Japanese resistance remained fanatical but increasingly futile. Suicide squads burst from hidden spider holes only to be incinerated before reaching their targets. Anti-tank guns fired at point-blank range, their crews continuing to shoot even as flames swallowed their positions. In one extraordinary moment, a Japanese officer emerged from a bunker wielding a samurai sword and charged directly toward tank number 434. The tank's bow gunner hesitated, whether from shock or respect, allowing Marine riflemen to cut the officer down just yards from the vehicle. His sword was later recovered and sent to Marine Corps headquarters as a symbol of the enemy's desperate courage. By sunset on March 21, the gorge had been breached. More than 800 Japanese defenders lay dead, many burned beyond recognition. The flamethrower tanks had consumed 8,000 gallons of fuel mixture in a single day, a record for the campaign. Marine casualties, though still severe at 92 killed and 257 wounded, were a fraction of what a conventional assault would have cost. But the price of victory was becoming clear on both sides. Tank crews reported profound psychological trauma from their role in the fighting. Corporal Carlson of Tank Number 431 later testified, "You could hear them screaming when the flame hit. Not for long, but sometimes you heard it at night. I still hear it. We did what we had to do, but I'll never forget the smell. Burning flesh mixed with sulfur from the volcanic rock." Maintenance crews discovered human remains fused to tank tracks, requiring blowtorches to remove. The tanks themselves were breaking down under relentless stress. Transmissions failed from constant operation in volcanic ash. Fuel lines clogged with carbon residue from the napalm mixture. Track pins sheared under the weight of additional armor plates welded on for protection. By late March, keeping even 4 flamethrower tanks operational required cannibalizing parts from damaged vehicles. On March 26, 1945, Iwo Jima was officially declared secure. The battle had lasted 36 days instead of the projected 5. American casualties totaled 26,038, including 6,821 killed, numbers that stunned both the American public and military leadership. Japanese losses were nearly total, of approximately 21,000. Defenders, only 216 survived to become prisoners. The rest died fighting, or, in growing numbers as the battle wore on, chose suicide rather than capture or death by fire. The flamethrower tanks had fundamentally altered the dynamics of the battle. Post-action studies credited them with reducing American casualties by an estimated 5,000 men. They had destroyed more than 1,000 fortified positions, consumed roughly 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture, and permanently reshaped Marine Corps assault doctrine. Yet their most profound impact may have been psychological. They shattered the long-held belief in the invincibility of Japanese defensive positions. Captain Frank Caldwell, commanding Company F of the 26th Marines, offered perhaps the clearest assessment. It was the flame tank, more than any other supporting weapon, that won the battle. Artillery, naval gunfire, and aerial bombardment could not force the Japanese out of their underground fortresses. The flamethrower tanks accomplished what nothing else could. Statistical analysis revealed the full scope of their effect. More than 30% of Japanese casualties on Iwo Jima were caused by flame weapons, both tank-mounted and portable. In sectors where flame tanks operated, the rate of advance increased by 300% compared to unsupported attacks. Japanese prisoners, a rarity in the Pacific War, numbered 216, more than the combined total taken at Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. Many explicitly cited fear of being burned alive as the reason they surrendered. The implications extended far beyond Iwo Jima. The Marine Corps immediately requested 54 additional flamethrower tanks for future operations. Colonel Unmark's team at Schofield Barracks shifted into maximum production mode. Granted AAA priority, the same classification given to the B-29 bomber program and the Manhattan Project, they developed the improved CB-H-2 model with greater range and reliability. By June 1945, 70 new flame tanks stood ready for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. The Army, observing the Marine Corps' success, accelerated its own flamethrower tank program. The entire 713th Tank Battalion was converted to flame tanks for the Okinawa campaign. During the Battle of Okinawa between April and June 1945, Army flame tanks would consume more than 200,000 gallons of fuel mixture, proving equally devastating against Japanese cave complexes in the island's southern sector. What had begun as a last-minute improvisation became standard equipment for Pacific operations. But the significance reached beyond tactics. Japanese military doctrine, refined over centuries, had failed catastrophically in the face of American technological innovation. The flamethrower tanks represented more than a new weapon. They embodied the transformation of warfare from individual valor to industrial capability. Production records tell the story. Colonel Unmark's flame tank program ultimately produced 354 flamethrower tanks by the end of the war. The Seabees at Schofield Barracks manufactured 226,343 gallons of flamethrower fuel. The napalm mixing facility they constructed could produce 1,000 gallons per day. Replicated across the Pacific, this industrial capacity meant American forces could, quite literally, burn their way through Japanese defenses. The men who created these weapons received little public recognition. Machinists Mate Riker and electricians Mate Kissel returned quietly to civilian life after the war, their names remembered only in obscure technical documents. Colonel Unmark continued working in chemical weapons development until retirement, his contribution known to only a small circle of military historians. Yet their work saved thousands of American lives and shortened one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. The tank crews bore a different burden. Many struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Memories of human beings reduced to ash, of screams cut short by consuming flame, haunted men who had done exactly what duty demanded. Sergeant Meza rarely spoke of his service, breaking his silence only shortly before his death in 1993. He told his grandson, "We did what we had to do. Nobody should be proud of burning men alive, but those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives. That's what I try to remember." Veterans of the flame tanks formed an informal support network after the war. Each year, they gathered in Hawaii, returning to Schofield Barracks where their weapons had been born. These reunions, unreported by the media, allowed them to share experiences too dark for civilian understanding. The final gathering took place in 2010, attended by just 4 surviving crew members. The Japanese perspective emerged slowly through prisoner interrogations and captured documents. Soldiers taught that death in battle guaranteed spiritual transcendence found themselves immobilized by the fear of incineration. The shame of fleeing a position became preferable to dying in underground ovens. This psychological collapse contributed directly to the first large-scale surrenders in Japanese military history. Lieutenant Yamada, who had witnessed the very first flamethrower tank attack on February 20th, survived the battle as one of the 216 prisoners. In post-war testimony to American intelligence officers, he reflected, "We had prepared for every kind of death: bullets, shells, bayonets, starvation. We had not prepared for burning petroleum that hunted us inside our deepest bunkers. The flame tanks broke our spirit in ways no conventional weapon could. They turned our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into our tombs." Former Sergeant Masao Hayashi, captured after being burned while fleeing a bunker, offered even more graphic testimony. "The napalm came like a flood, pouring into every space. Men tried to escape through emergency exits, only to find more fire waiting. Some shot themselves rather than burn. Others ran into American gunfire, choosing bullets over incineration. I saw veterans who had fought since China refused to enter positions after seeing flame tanks approach. This was not the death we had trained for." The transformation brought about by the flamethrower tanks did not end with the battle itself. In the post-war period, the United States Marine Corps carefully analyzed the success at Iwo Jima and fundamentally restructured its assault doctrine around combined arms warfare, integrating armor, infantry, and engineers as a single coordinated system. The idea of developing specialized armored vehicles to solve specific battlefield problems became standard military thinking. Future weapons programs would increasingly emphasize adaptability and innovation rather than raw firepower alone. The technology continued to evolve. The M4A3 Sherman flamethrower tanks later saw service in Korea, where they proved highly effective against Chinese bunker complexes during battles such as the Punch Bowl and Heartbreak Ridge. Marine flame tanks destroyed more than 300 Chinese defensive positions during the Korean War, though their impact was less dramatic as Chinese forces quickly learned to recognize and counter their capabilities. The last American flamethrower tank, The M132 armored flamethrower, based on the M113 armored personnel carrier, was not retired until 1978. That marked the end of a weapons lineage that had begun with 8 hastily modified Shermans inside a secret warehouse in Hawaii. By that time, thermobaric weapons and precision-guided munitions had largely replaced flamethrowers as the primary tools for defeating hardened positions. International law also evolved. Protocol 3 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons placed restrictions on the use of incendiary weapons, and flamethrowers became increasingly controversial as public opinion shifted against weapons considered excessively cruel. Yet military historians continue to note the bitter irony. For all their horror, the flamethrower tanks had shortened the battle and likely saved thousands of lives that prolonged conventional assaults would have consumed. The industrial achievement behind them cannot be overstated. During World War II, the United States produced 49,234 Sherman tanks. Only 354 were converted into flamethrower variants. Yet those few hundred vehicles exerted an influence far beyond their numbers. At Iwo Jima, just 8 tanks altered the course of a battle that might otherwise have dragged on for months and claimed tens of thousands more casualties. The production cost, roughly $200,000 per converted tank in 1945 dollars, appears almost trivial when weighed against the lives saved. Military analysts later calculated that each flame tank at Iwo Jima potentially preserved 625 American casualties, based on the difference between unsupported attacks and assaults supported by flame tanks. In the cold arithmetic of war, the investment in technology paid dividends in blood not spilled. Perhaps the most enduring legacy was psychological. The flamethrower tanks demonstrated that technological innovation could overcome even the most fanatical human resistance. The age of individual warrior prowess was fading, replaced by an era in which victory belonged to nations capable of superior industrial production and technical ingenuity. The samurai spirit, for all its nobility, could not withstand liquid fire delivered by mass-produced machines. In the volcanic soil of Iwo Jima, beneath monuments to courage and sacrifice, lie the remains of more than 20,000 Japanese soldiers who died defending positions they believed impregnable. Many were incinerated by weapons they never imagined could exist. Their deaths marked not only the end of a battle, but the end of an era in which spiritual devotion could overcome material disadvantage. The 8 M4A3 flamethrower tanks that fought on Iwo Jima were, at their core, machines, steel, aluminum, rubber, and mechanical components assembled by factory workers who would never see combat. Yet they represented something far greater: the mobilization of American industrial power, scientific creativity, and mechanical expertise in service of victory. The Seabees who built them, the Marines who crewed them, and the Japanese soldiers who faced them were all participants in a transformation that would define modern warfare. Today, the last surviving flamethrower tank from Iwo Jima sits in the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Tank number 434, preserved as a museum exhibit, still bears the scars of combat: welded patches where armor was repaired, deep dents from shell impacts, scratches carved by volcanic rock. A small plaque lists its specifications and battle record. What it cannot convey is the sound of compressed nitrogen releasing, the stench of burning napalm mixed with sulfur, or the sight of liquid fire flowing like water into underground fortresses. Many visitors pass by quickly, unsettled by the weapon's terrible purpose. Schoolchildren on field trips ask why anyone would invent something so horrifying. Veterans who know its history often linger longer, some saluting, others standing in silence. For them, the tank is not a symbol of glorified violence, but a reminder of war's brutal necessities. The final reunion of Iwo Jima flamethrower tank veterans was held in 2015, marking the battle's 70th anniversary. Only 3 former crew members attended, all in their 90s. They gathered at the museum, sharing memories with historians determined to preserve first-hand accounts before they vanished forever. Corporal Anthony Vitelli, former gunner on tank number 436, offered perhaps the most poignant reflection of all. People often asked if he felt proud of what they had done. Pride, he said, was not the right word. They had carried out a terrible task because it had to be done. Those tanks saved Marine lives, and that was enough. Nearly all the men who designed, built, and operated the flamethrower tanks have now passed into history. Corporal Herschel "Woody" Williams, who fought alongside the flame tanks with his portable flamethrower, was the last Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima to die, passing away in June 2022 at the age of 98. With him went the last living memory of the terrible reality of flame warfare. His foundation continues to support Gold Star families, ensuring that the sacrifices of those who died are never forgotten. Colonel Unmark's once classified reports, declassified in the 1970s, reveal the frantic pace of innovation that produced the flamethrower tanks, men working 20-hour days, sleeping in shifts beside their welding equipment. The Seabees achieved in weeks what conventional military procurement would have taken years to accomplish. Their reward was witnessing their creation succeed beyond all expectations, helping to shorten one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. Japanese military archives, open to researchers in the 1980s, reveal the enemy's perspective on facing flamethrower tanks. Report after report describes the paralysis of watching liquid fire advance, knowing that concrete and steel offered no protection. Orders to hold positions to the death became meaningless when death arrived as flowing fire that hunted down every hiding place. One Japanese report stated, "The flame tanks nullified every advantage of our defenses. Height meant nothing when fire could arc over obstacles. Depth meant nothing when flame flowed like water into tunnels. Concrete and steel that could withstand tons of explosives were useless against liquid fire." General Kurabayashi's final message, transmitted shortly before his death in late March 1945, contained a prescient observation. The Americans, he wrote, had not defeated Japan with superior numbers or firepower alone. They had prevailed through superior imagination, turning Japan's greatest strength, its underground fortifications, into death traps. Future wars, he warned, would belong to nations capable of imagining new forms of warfare, not those who merely perfected old ones. His prediction proved accurate. The revolution in military affairs that began with 8 flamethrower tanks on Iwo Jima continued through guided missiles, precision weapons, and eventually cyber warfare. The underlying principle remained constant. Technological innovation defeats traditional tactics. Imagination triumphs over convention. The transformation from conventional assault to flame-supported warfare on Iwo Jima took only days, yet it permanently changed combat doctrine. Marines trained for traditional frontal assaults learned to coordinate with flame tanks, exploiting their shock effect to shatter defensive lines once thought impregnable. This adaptation did not come from manuals or formal instruction, but from battlefield innovation under fire, a hallmark of American military flexibility. Post-war statistical analysis revealed striking patterns in sectors where flame tanks operated. Japanese defenders were 70% more likely to abandon positions before being overrun. The psychological impact exceeded even the physical destruction. In many cases, the mere presence of flamethrower tanks caused defensive collapse without a single shot being fired. One Marine intelligence report concluded, "The enemy's fear of flame tanks borders on panic." Prisoners report that soldiers refuse orders to occupy positions once flame tanks are sighted in the area. The 8 flamethrower tanks of Iwo Jima had accomplished something extraordinary. In 36 days of combat, they validated a new form of warfare, saved thousands of American lives, and contributed decisively to victory in one of World War II's most critical battles. Their legacy carried forward into every subsequent conflict where American forces faced entrenched enemies, from Korea to Vietnam to Iraq. Yet the moral questions they raised remained unresolved. Many surviving tank crewmen struggled with the reality of what they had done. The efficiency of killing by fire, the industrial scale of incineration, challenged traditional ideas of honorable warfare. These men had become instruments of terrible necessity, wielding weapons that reduced human beings to ash in seconds. Many never spoke of their service, choosing to carry their memories to the grave rather than burden others with the horror. The final testament came during a reconciliation ceremony on Iwo Jima in 1985. Former tank commander Robert Meza and former Lieutenant Koshi Yamada, who had witnessed the first flamethrower tank attack, stood together at the site where Tank 431 had fired 40 years earlier. Speaking through an interpreter, Yamada said, "I hated you for 40 years. The flame tanks killed my friends in ways I cannot forget. But I understand now. War makes monsters of us all. You did what you had to do, as did we." Meza replied simply, "We were all just boys trying to survive. I'm glad we both lived to stand here today." The two aging warriors embraced. As the sun set over Iwo Jima's black sand beaches, they walked together toward the memorial honoring all who had died. Behind them, Mount Suribachi rose against the darkening sky. The island that had once burned with the fury of battle had returned to silence. The age of the flamethrower tank had begun and ended in the Pacific, its legacy written in fire across volcanic islands. 8 modified Shermans had changed the nature of warfare, proving that victory in modern conflict belonged to nations capable of marrying industrial might with battlefield innovation. The flames had long since died, but their impact on military history burned on. In the end, the Battle of Iwo Jima was not won by courage alone, though courage was abundant on both sides, but by the fusion of American industrial capacity and combat innovation. The flamethrower tanks embodied the convergence of technology, tactics, and determination that would define American military power for generations. They were weapons of their era, grim necessities in a war that demanded total victory. The Japanese defenders fought with extraordinary bravery, obeying orders to resist to the death. They had constructed the most formidable defensive system of the Pacific War, a subterranean fortress immune to conventional weapons. What they had not anticipated were incendiary weapons that fell like molten rain, flowing into every cave and bunker, transforming their underground sanctuary into a crematorium. Their defeat was not a failure of courage, but a collision with superior technology and imagination. The numbers tell the final story with brutal clarity. 8 flamethrower tanks, 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture, more than 1,000 fortified positions destroyed, an estimated 5,000 American casualties prevented, over 6,000 Japanese soldiers killed by flame weapons, 36 days of combat that might have stretched into months without them. The mathematics of modern warfare, where technological advantage translated directly into lives saved and battles won. The volcanic island of Iwo Jima, now returned to Japan and renamed Iwoto, shows few visible traces of the battle that once consumed it. Nature has reclaimed the landscape, softening shell craters with vegetation and filling trenches with drifting volcanic soil. Yet beneath the surface, sealed caves and collapsed tunnels still entomb the remains of soldiers who died in the flames, their sacrifice remembered by fewer and fewer living witnesses. The final word belongs to General Holland Smith, commander of the 5th Amphibious Corps at Iwo Jima, who later wrote in his memoirs, "The flamethrower tanks were the difference between victory and catastrophe. Without them, we would have paid an unbearable price for every yard of that cursed island. They were horrible weapons, but war is a horrible business. In the end, they saved more lives than any other weapon we employed." The flames that consumed Japanese positions on Iwo Jima have long since faded. The men who unleashed them have mostly passed into history. Yet the revolution they created, the shift from individual combat to technological dominance, continues to shape military thought across the world. In 8 modified Sherman tanks, America found the means to break the deadlock of the Pacific War's most formidable fortress, forever altering the nature of warfare in the process. The battle was over. The war would soon follow. But the echo of those flames, the hiss of compressed nitrogen, the sight of liquid fire flowing into underground fortresses, The screams, cut short by unbearable heat, would resonate through military history forever. On a volcanic island in the Pacific, the age of the warrior ended in fire. The age of technological warfare had begun.